5, 6, 7, 8.
Hi EXers, welcome to the EX podcast episode number 59. This is your host, Stefan Vincent. I'm here today with you because we need to shake things up in the world of HR, talent acquisition, and company culture in order to create positive employee experiences in our organizations. Your workplace doesn't have to be a dreadful place where employees feel disengaged. This podcast brings a different lens to the HR, employee engagement, and company culture conversation. We approach these topics from a brand and customer experience angle rather than a traditional HR angle. Our guests, all thought leaders and disruptors in the EX space in their own way, come to this show to share best practices on the key elements that foster employee engagement and strengthen company culture, and also to spark the conversation on how to create positive employee experiences. Not every company can do what Airbnb or Google do around their employee experience. And this is what this show is all about, sharing stories of companies of all sizes, not only to show that EX doesn't require a large budget or a large team, but also that there isn't one recipe. Each company can find its own way through the EX journey. Today's guest is Peter Phelan, founder and CEO of ValuesCulture. Today with Peter, we talk about what is cultural debt. What are some of the warning signs that a culture is no longer working? How can you assess and measure cultural debt? How you can prevent or fix it? And what talent acquisition strategy organizations need to put in place to find the right people to carry on the culture and avoid cultural debt. This episode is brought to you by Spring International. Spring is a women-owned boutique firm that focuses on performance-based employee engagement and people analytics. From onboarding to exit, Spring uses proven techniques to help companies improve the employee experience and calculate the ROI of HR programs and initiatives. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Peter. And because it takes a good amount of time to produce this podcast, please make sure to review the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, or YouTube, as it would help promote the content. If you want me to speak at your next event, get some advice on your EX initiatives, or send me feedback and suggestions for future topics or guests, you can reach me at svincent@exsummit.com or on Twitter at EX_summit. All right, let's get to it. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the EX podcast. Super excited for today's guest, Peter Phelan. Peter is calling from New York City. You may hear some background sounds typical from the Big Apple as we go along. And he's the founder and CEO of ValuesCulture. He's also a 20-year veteran in people and culture leadership, including chief people officer roles at leading global technology companies where he created award-winning cultures. Peter, thanks for joining us today.
It's great to be here, Stefan. Thank you for having me.
Tell us a bit about your journey and why you started ValuesCulture.
Definitely, yeah. And we'll see if the New York City street noises cooperate. They're being awfully quiet, although I didn't close the window. But yeah, they'll be along shortly, I imagine. So, yeah, I'll give you a very quick overview on maybe what inspired ValuesCulture, because it was born out of my corporate career. I am, like yourself, not a US born. I was born in Ireland and grew up there and went to bachelor's and master's degree programs in University College Dublin. And the bachelor's program, even, you get pretty specific, and maybe more so than the US schools at an early age. So at 17, we had to decide what we wanted to do as our career. Yep. So I took commerce. And then 1 year into that, you have to decide, okay, which aspect of business. So many people were going to banking and finance, or accounting was oddly popular. And I chose this very unpopular. About 7% of the students were going into management, and I just loved the whole idea of organizational behavior and how to motivate people, and kind of carried it on to my master's program, where I went deeper into human capital. And so, yeah, I didn't have any hesitations about starting a career in HR, and then I had the good fortune to get a lottery green card. So I got started here in the States, where a lot of the great case studies and thinkers that I've been reading about in business school have been coming from. So started in healthcare, financial services, law firm, found it to be a very highly transferable skill set, and got bigger and broader roles as I moved through the career. And that's not, necessarily, or didn't feel like a necessarily good thing, entirely getting broader and broader in the roles, because I think as any HR folks listening will know that there's a lot of different mini jobs within the HR function. So you begin to feel a little bit like the jack of all trades, but maybe not master of many of them as you would like. So I became a chief people officer. You're very kind to mention that in the little opening remarks. But I would say I curated the cultures, didn't create them. I know you said curated, but just to be clear for the listeners, cultures will happen. But if you are very intentional in communications and making very selective cultural promises, you can curate the culture. You can guide it. So I was, in these big jobs at MediaMath or Shutterstock, global chief people officer roles, and really enjoying the culture curation pieces, and not enjoying as much the other 30 different jobs that are part of the HR function. So I decided, hey, I'm going to try and do the one that I enjoy the most, and took the leap from the corporate tower. And now I'm happy to report that 2 years and change in, this cultural consultancy is working out.
We connected after I read one of your blogs about culture debt. Can you explain what you mean by culture debt? Because it's quite an interesting concept.
Oh, absolutely. I love talking about this stuff, although it is, a dark manifestation of issues. And it's proven to be quite a successful communication tool, especially with a lot of my clients who are in the tech space. And I will often do the analogy with tech debt to explain cultural debt. So just to kind of refresh everyone's memories on what tech debt is. So you are building a platform of some kind, and you have a business goal that you're very focused on. And maybe it's getting your first client, or integrating with a client that requires a tech integration, or it's getting a product to market before the competition, or getting a product, impressive looking on the outside so you get some investment. You've got something that you want to do quickly, and you make it happen. But the code is not pretty. It's pretty sloppy. But you get to your objective, and you get the client, or you get the funding, and you live to fight another day. And you maybe will be okay with the fact that you have to go back and clean up the messy code, clean up the code base after the fact, because you did something pragmatic, and you survived, and it's kind of the cost of doing business, if you will. So that's tech debt, basically sloppy, non-scalable tech, but you can go back and fix it afterwards. So cultural debt is a little bit like that insofar as you're being expedient. You maybe overpromise and underdeliver, and all of a sudden the sort of trust and faith of people in your team is diminished. And the trouble with this versus tech debt is they will remember, the code base, unless you got some really intelligent system, some artificial intelligence that will get offended if you do bad code. Chances are the code base will forgive you, but the employee base may not. And then when you have this perception, hopefully a contained one, but even a limited one, of promises having been broken, that hurts your organization. People are going to be less inclined to give discretionary effort to an organization or to a leadership team where they perceive that they've overpromised and underdelivered on what the organization should provide to them. So it's kind of a chilling thing to have cultural debt, but it's a good shorthand, often coupled with tech debt, and it's really a perception that promises have been broken, and it's the beginning of problems.
What are the warning signs that illustrates that a culture is no longer working?
Yeah, so there's a variety of them, and some of them you can track in a very scientific way. You can do your employee satisfaction surveys using a lot of great platforms that are out there right now, like Culture Amp or Tiny Pulse, that'll help you track sentiment over time, so you can see how it's trending. But often before you do the survey, if you're kind of observant, you'll know. It's smiling faces. You're walking around the hallways, and if people are smiling and engaging and seem to be just upbeat, that's a good sign that the culture is at least somewhat positive. If the business is doing well, there's a certain positivity about that comes with winning, so those are signs that things may be okay, and the opposite, might be a sign that culture isn't working so well. If people are just kind of shuffling around the office, not engaging, not smiling, going through the motions, then that could be an early warning sign. And similarly, if the business is struggling, then that can be a sign that people aren't giving their all. The salesperson isn't maybe giving that bit of discretionary effort to close the deal, or the coders aren't inspired by the projects they're working on, and maybe they don't see their connection to the organizational success or to the impact that the organization has on the world, and they're like, just kind of going through the motions. So business. Not doing well can be, sadly, because it's a lagging indicator. You may be, in a bad spot if you use that as your signal. But I'm definitely a fan of doing some kind of surveys. I think that's, if you're not particularly tuned into this kind of thing, you're very focused on, say, the business and not so much focused on the people, and you don't have this great, natural God-given EQ as a leader. Do some surveys. That'll be data that you can use.
Let's talk a bit more about the surveys, because there are many different positions and different opinions about the surveys, and the frequency or the cadence of the surveys, how many questions we should have, who and how should we survey people, and oftentimes you can also easily manipulate some of the results or some of the data and skew it and direct it in the way that you want the results to appear, or to to seem to be positive, or whatever it might be. So could you give us some tips about how to design a good and relevant survey, and how often should we survey employees?
Sure. So I think that the various concerns you flag on frequency and kind of design are all things to be intentional about. Before there were lots of products like Culture IQ or Culture Amp or Tiny Pulse on the market, people were, myself included, were kind of fumbling in the dark and putting together SurveyMonkey surveys, maybe using the Gallup 12 questions, which are a very popular set of 12 questions that are really strong correlations to engagement. And they tap into to what extent the person connects with their manager, their colleagues, the mission of the organization, that they're having career development. So, I think if you did want to do something quick and dirty, that might actually even today not be a bad place to go. If you look at some of the more sophisticated tools like Culture Amp, you can see that the Gallup 12 questions are somewhere in the, ancestral roots of the 57 questions that Culture Amp have put together. But on the frequency, I think, it depends on the organization's sort of appetite. I think that if you are pretty good at taking action and actually doing material change with the data you get from the survey, then the appetite might not be bad with the employee base for, say, doing it every quarter. If they know that once they submit their survey responses, that the company, which are hopefully constructed in a way that seems objective and kind of not designed to skew answers, if they see a survey that seems rational, and then the results of the survey are transparently played back to the team in pretty short order, and the organization says, okay, so we can only do so many things in a quarter before we do the next survey. So we're going to look at these two biggest areas where you have constructive feedback for the organization and where they're getting in the way of your engagement. And we're going to do something about those, maybe with your help. There could be a task force involved, or like simply an investment where money is provided by the company to fund something. So in that scenario, and then, the organization would have to do what they promised they were going to do, and there should be something new and real and positive in the world rolled out to the entire org. If you do that, and that's a lot to do each quarter, because there's so many other things to take care of in a business, then I'd say an organization might have, the employee base might have no issue with doing an in-depth survey, every quarter. What might be more realistic, if you're going to be investing resources in affecting change, might be, say, every 6 months, where you've actually got time for the new thing to be rolled out, and people to have feedback on this, and really, have tried it on for size, and appreciate, the investment that's been made. That might be, more realistic in a growing organization that's got lots of different whack-a-mole issues to address, and they aren't, just existing to create a great culture.
Right.
You've got a business to run.
There are many challenges around successfully conducting surveys, right? I see two challenges that come to mind. One is, how do you ensure that employees are going to respond candidly to the questions and not under fear or pressure from their managers or leadership? And the other one is, how can the organization react quickly to the feedback, the input provided by the employees? Because if you take a month or 2 months to analyze and come up with a plan, it's a bit too late to be able to act on some of the insights gathered from the survey. So the questions are, how do you ensure that employees respond candidly, and how would you recommend organizations to come up with a plan rather quickly?
Right. Yeah, it's it is a whole lot easier now than it used to be quick. At least with the data side, actually affecting change is, can be harder. But if you imagine like 8 years ago, a couple of organizations kind of back into my full-time career, we'd do surveys using SurveyMonkey, and then, we'd have to export the data and cut it a few different ways for different stakeholder groups, divisions or whatever, who would have slightly different results, slightly different priorities. And we'd make these big PowerPoint presentations with recommendations from HR, and the whole thing would take like 6 weeks from beginning to end. So the data would already be stale by the time, those who are in a position to affect change would even have it. Now, it's going to sound like a Culture Amp commercial. Apologies to the competitor. But you've got, and this will answer both questions a little bit. In terms of candid information or candid responses, it's an anonymous survey that's being administered by a third party. So you should have a pretty good confidence level that not even the HR people can see who said what. Like nobody within the organization can. Only some select few people at Culture Amp could even do it, and they're sworn to secrecy. So you're getting this safe space in which to give your feedback, and then on the sort of SurveyMonkey PowerPoint side of things, that's no longer the case, because as soon as the survey closes, you've got this very beautiful set of charts to look at, where you see exactly where the sentiments fell and all these, again, Gallup 12, so fairly reliable framework, but more detailed. All these dimensions, and Culture Amp also has some guidance on like what you do with this information in a way, because they have a lot of clients now, so they've actually got benchmarks. So if you're a tech company in Toronto or a tech company in Boston or New York or the Bay Area, there's a bunch of different peer organizations where you can see, how you rate on these different dimensions of employee engagement to your peers. So even if you're kind of like, okay, we're 85% engaged and we're 70%, people are 70% happy with the various dimensions. Remember, like, now what do I do with this information? Doesn't seem too alarming. But then if you add in the layer of peer benchmarks, then you'll maybe have a bit more inspiration about where you might want to prioritize taking action. Because you might be, 70%, which seems fine, I guess, on some dimension, maybe on, managers' ability to give candid feedback. But your peers are ahead of the game, and 80% is the new normal there. So you might be like, oh, wow, okay, so this 3-month cycle, this 6-month cycle, whatever, that's what we're going to double down on and make some investments in. So, I think having a good platform where you've got some high degree of confidence that it's safe and candid. I think just to add a little funny detail, but hopefully make the point. On the Culture Amp platform, unless there's 5 responses from a certain demographic, like software engineers in Indianapolis, then you won't even see the result. So there's like built-in anonymity, where the results of the engagement survey don't even kind of post until there's the safety of numbers in any particular demographic. So I think going for that is step one, because you do want people's feedback, and for it to be unsullied by their wondering if there'll be consequences to them being truthful.
What are some other ways than surveys in your minds to assess and measure the cultural debt? So, again, business performance is often a pretty strong indicator that if you kind of work your way back from a business decline, it can often be, general market conditions. But if there was a market sector that's doing pretty well, and all of a sudden your company is the one that stood out by its lack of success, so many times that can be traced back to a broken promise, and it may be one singular moment of CEO doing something horrible or whatever, or just a kind of death by 1,000 cuts, where you've got maybe an executive team that's turning over really quickly, where half the executives are different every year, which leads to just a general lack of faith that the system is working, and a badly executed layoff could also be a source of cultural death that you back into, and when the symptom has been a decline in
business performance versus peers. So the other kind of indicators that you will see that are kind of visible from the outside and kind of the employee turnover, where people, whether they got a survey or not, and they have a vote that they can cast with their feet. And LinkedIn is pretty good these days for, analyzing tenure in organizations. It's not a perfect system because sometimes people don't keep their LinkedIn profiles up to date, or if they're between jobs, they'll kind of say they're still working at their past organization. But, it's not a bad source of turnover data when you look at the company profile of an organization on LinkedIn. So if that's, tracking 1.5 years or something, you're, okay, and this other competitor is like 3 or 4 years, that might be some indication that they've got themselves into a little bit of cultural debt. And the other cry for help one, which is always very interesting reading, is Glassdoor.
I was about to mention it. Yes.
Yeah, on the Glassdoor kind of competitors like Comparably, Perry Godbots even, where you're going to maybe things are pretty bad in an organization, and people they need a place to tell their story, cry for help, or a bit of revenge or something from the aggrieved former employee. That can be a pretty clear indicator of cultural debt. The tanking Glassdoor profile. 1 or 2 bad reviews are to be expected.
Right.
Basically, I think the Yelp effect, or some kind of ratio out there where you're 7 times more likely to take action or write a review if you're unhappy than you are if you're happy. So unhappiness can be a big motivator to take action like this, which means that any site like Yelp or Glassdoor, you would take it with a grain of salt. But when you start seeing a trend line and the reviews aren't just rants on unhinged rants, but they're actually pretty precise and solution-oriented constructive feedback, and you see a lot of those coming in over time, similar themes, issues clearly not being addressed, then that's not a good situation. I think that's a pretty strong cultural debt indicator, but maybe not as strong as the statistically significant in-house survey. Because you might be lucky to have 8% of your team do. Lucky is maybe a strange choice of words, but maybe 8% of the team might do Glassdoor surveys in a year. But on an internal survey where there's a high degree of confidence that it's confidential, it wouldn't be unreasonable to aspire to 80% of response rates. So the Glassdoor thing will always be pale in comparison to the statistical significance of an internal survey. But I've even seen situations where the lack of an internal survey kind of drove desperate people to Glassdoor. So step 1, do a survey, to protect yourself. You better do stuff with the findings and share the findings and do all the best practices once you do that survey. But just even having a survey to begin with may reduce the cries for help on social media.
Yeah, I would say maybe even another one as well is for the companies who have employee referral programs, is the number of referrals that they get from the employees.
Yeah, that's a really good one. When that begins to tank, that is a really good indicator of cultural debt. There's different ways of constructing programs like that, and some of them are some companies have a philosophical stance where they like referrals but they won't pay for them. They working with your respected friend should be reward enough versus cost prize. And then in a competitive job market like we have today, especially for tech talent, some have very significant rewards, 5-figure sums for helping the organization identify a great engineer, data scientist, whatever the case may be, which is still a pretty good pretty good deal, I would say, as an HR professional, because it beats paying 3 or 4 times that amount to an external agency.
Yeah. And what's interesting too is it's, especially when you have some cash incentive attached to the referral, it is how much employees are willing to refer people knowing that they're not fully engaged or fully excited about working at the company just for the sake of getting a bonus. And usually I don't think that the cash incentive itself is enough to lure people that inside the company. But it's always a good indicator, I think, to see what how employees are feeling about working for you if you have a referral bonus and actually you're not getting that many referrals from employees.
Yes, yeah, it's so interesting. You're right. I think it's the things have to be you have to be pretty desperate for money, to refer a friend in to try and convince them to work in a toxic environment. So I don't think that happens very often. So when you've got these $10,000 plus rewards for referrals and zero activity, then that's pretty good sign you got some cultural debt issues.
So let's look at the positive sign now. When you see those early indicators of the employee engagement going down, how, well, it may be too late to prevent it, but if you can prevent it early enough, or even if you have to fix it, what are some of the key elements to consider to start a program to fix that employee disengagement crisis?
Yeah. So, there's a lot to be said for, humbly, and this can be a big stretch for some people or some leaders, humbly, admitting that you don't have it all figured out. And just saying, we need your help. We're not just doing this survey because we're told that organizations our size should do surveys. It's because we really care, and we suspect that people aren't as engaged as they might be. We want to see this data. We want your help, fixing things that we identify. We're going to hold people accountable to new standards where we think they've slipped into a place that, is not aligned with our values anymore. And we're going to have, real leadership from the top on anything we're saying we're fixing. You will not see managers or executive team members, breaking the new rules we set or whatever. So there has to be a strong public admission that we want to make things better and we're going to invest in making things better. And then, gathering the data, sharing it back candidly, with the entire team, I think is an important step. It's like, okay, here's what we've learned about the organization, that people are, happy with certain things, but they're terribly unhappy with the lack of career paths, for example, or they don't feel a connection with the mission anymore. And they think of this, let's give examples of this scale, we should have a 401k match, and we don't. So it's like, so then leadership has to step up and say, okay, thank you. There's these 3 big concerns, and then there's 17 others, which, were less maybe strongly felt based on the data. So we're going to go with these top 3. Here's the good news on the 401k. We are able to, start small on a match, and we'll do 1% starting next year. With respect to the, manager feedback thing, we're going to invest there as well, and maybe we'll get cross-functional group together to talk about, what good feedback might look like here, and do something kind of scalable there as well. Like, not all, magic wandy, fix everything overnight. We're going to be like, okay, what can we do here? What's kind of low-hanging fruit that we can build upon? Maybe this task force doesn't have to, come up with what good management looks like on its own, but they'll be the task force that dives into, the Google rework platform and pick which of the tools and tricks there that very smart people have, noodled with and figured out before. And we'll see which of those things we're going to, lovingly adopt in our org because they're right for us, and set some achievable goals around being better. And then on the last example, I'm really going to down these examples, Stefan, on the communication and the connection with the mission of the organization. Like, okay, we're going to do a better job of that. We have board decks that we present to our board every quarter. So, and we've only been doing semi-annual all-hands meetings. So now we've got these board decks. We're going to share them with you the day after we do the board meeting. It's already been prepared. It's the latest and greatest data on the business and our plans. We should be sharing that with you anyway. Apologies for not doing it before. And then, quick responses. Some will be projects. Some can be fast. And then keep on doing it. That's how you would kind of get out of cultural debt, is by showing good intentions, showing that you're, don't have it all figured out, but with the team's help, you'll begin to chip away at issues, and then staying on top of it, and, not forgetting to do that all hands the day after the board meeting, because you got busy, if there's a big client pitch or whatever. Nope, that's a commitment. If you break a promise, you'll have more cultural debt. So promise what you can deliver on. Don't promise on all of the other 17 less urgent issues that you're going to do something about them, because you're probably not. We're all busy. But say that we're going to do another vote in 6 months, and then we'll do something about the top 3 issues at that time. And then just, do a little bit of marketing, I'd say, Stefan, because people forget quickly. Organizations have a zillion things going on. People will forget that certain of the reforms that happened were because of the survey. So, remind them, maybe in your promotional emails for the next survey, you could say, and for those of you who weren't here, because we've been hiring a lot, here's what we did with the survey results from last time. Here are the lessons learned and what we did about it and the investments we made and how we improved the employee experience. So please give us your candid answers on the upcoming survey so we can keep on doing that.
And I would say that, I often say that building a company culture is very much like software development. It's about, building one version, one program, one initiative, testing it, making some iterations along the way, come up with a new or enhanced version, and so forth and so forth. An employee experience or any company culture program or initiative is never a finished product. It continuously evolve, right?
That's right, yeah. And it'll change, with scale. Every new hire will be a change to your culture, and maybe a small one as you get bigger, but it'll be a subtle change. Every departure is going to be another little change to the culture too. Definitely an iterative process, and some of it will be intentional by taking survey data and making specific programs, and some of it will be very unintentional, like some beloved manager leaving for maybe non-culture related reasons, family or whatever. But yeah, it's all these kind of micro actions, and it's hard to identify an action, I think, that's culture neutral. It'll either be slightly accretive and positive, or slightly negative, and maybe some of them are positive and negative at the same time. If it's something like a human being, joining the business who has some great strengths and some development areas, you're going to, take those positives and negatives into your culture, and people will feel them.
So let's talk a bit more about this. What talent acquisition strategy organizations needs to put in place to find the right people to carry on the culture and to avoid that cultural debt? Right.
So, and again, the culture will be dynamic. You'll have, as time goes by, you'll have different interview panels who are helping you curate the new culture, which is slightly different from real culture. And so, if you think you can keep the culture exactly as it is, if anybody who thinks that, they're able to do that, they're probably kidding themselves. But to keep it the core culture that maybe you're fond of and has proven to be your secret sauce versus the competition and keeps people happy and staying in your organization and your business is thriving. I recommend and do some work like this with clients where we, in a very data-driven, objective way, analyze, what is the secret sauce, culturally speaking? Why do people find this employee experience to be more favorable than others that are open to them? And that involves, surveys, but also kind of competency rankings using some robust tools, even personality assessments to see maybe what about the leadership team is conducive to this, success. And it can be interesting findings, sometimes eye-opening. People, leaders, and organizations will have blind spots, but when you get a big data set together that's focused on actual behaviors and which behaviors work and which are more problematic, you can begin to have a shot at publishing that secret sauce. Maybe it takes the form of a company, cultural manifesto or a set of values. So, my recommendation would be that if take this snapshot of the culture by doing a data-driven analysis of it, get lots of stakeholders involved, executives certainly, because they've got an outsized impact on the culture, but not only them. Culture champions from all corners of the organization, levels, tenures, departments, and have them, contribite to this data set of what's really good about working in this org, and filter it down to as simple a kind of set of elements as possible. It could be, say, 5 values, where you're like, we've got really broad agreement that this is our way of working that helps us win and helps people feel happy and accomplished here. And then publish the heck out of that. Have it be, on the careers portal, so people are seeing that before they apply and filtering themselves in or out accordingly, because your culture won't be for everyone. Sometimes cultures are too fast-paced for certain personality types or too scattered. Some people like to just be very focused, and if you're in a brand new industry, chances are that the culture of a successful business will have to be quite experimental and pivoty, and maybe that's not for you. So get to your truth, publish the truth as a filter for talent, and then when people do come into the funnel, have a very strong process around how we have behavioral interview questions for each of the values, and have those be divided up among people who are comfortable assessing those things in the panel. Maybe there's a homework assignment, maybe there's even personality type assessments or psychometric assessments as part of the interview process, which have proven validity for some of the elements of your secret sauce, and are without bias and whatnot so they pass the sniff test there. Get to your truth, and then put a very specific set of elements together to kind of validate that you are hiring for the right things.
And it's always a challenge. You talked about personality tests and other type of assessments, even through an in-person interview. It's not very easy to assess whether or not the person is going either to be a good fit or even just to contribute in other ways to the organization. Especially for those who are very skilled at selling themselves, they may sell something that is not really what they're going to deliver once they're hired. What do you make of this new trend of gaming and how you're using video games to assess candidates' skills to not only being able to solve specific problems that they are interviewing for to have the company, but also how they're going to fit into the culture itself?
Right. So I can't claim to be an expert on the use of games in particular, but I've certainly had great success in organizations with psychometric testing, where there was, certain aspects of the role that required a comfort level with certain kinds of problem solving. One test I've used at a previous employer is the Wonder Lick. Other organizations I've known have been great believers in other tools. The predictive index. I remember one manager who I respect had to hire a bunch of marketing analysts at one point in his career in a very fast-growing business, and they had a contract. They needed to get people fast, so they didn't actually interview them. They looked at their resumes, and they had them do this predictive index, and they hired based on that. So pretty mind-blowing stuff. And he shares in retrospect that those hires actually stuck more effectively and were better fits than cases of using the resume and the interview and not the test. So, I'm not opposed to doing stuff that isn't interviews. I'm actually a fan of it, and have quite often incorporated show and tell of, little mini bits of work product into, a process before you hire somebody. So you assign them something, and then they have to deliver it, and it has to be kind of all them. They can't take credit for other people's work who might be on a capable team that they used to work with, and that translates into a fun, but slightly misleading bullet point on their resume. So, I think that those can be good indicators of, cultural fit as well. Because if you've identified certain values that are, you can demonstrate through one of these non-interview tools, then let's do that to increase the chances of this being the right hire.
Okay, here we go. We're hearing the siren.
Yay!
So we're getting close to the end of our conversation today. So let me ask you some fun questions so that our audience get to know you a bit more intimately. So you're an immigrant like myself to the US. How long have you been in the US again?
Well, you're going to make me age myself now, Stefan. But I will admit to it being 24 years.
Okay, all right. So last year was my 15th year in the US. And just to celebrate that 15th anniversary, I wrote a blog about I think it was the 10 or 15 things that still irritate me about the US after that amount of time spent in the country. So let me ask you this question in return as well. What are some of the things that still irritate you here in the US that you didn't see when you were in Ireland?
So I'm a pretty well assimilated, because I've been here for the additional 9 years. But let me think back to some of my original gripes. I guess I found the candy to be not quite as good. No offense to the good people at Hershey, but the European chocolate that I was used to. I still think, actually 24 years in, that it's vastly superior. That might be also what used to be very true of American beer, but actually in the last...
yeah, that's an easy one coming from Ireland.
Yeah, but no, in full credit to, my adopted home, the strides that they've made in the last, 10, 15 years with great microbreweries and whatnot. I think there's really excellent beer to be had here as well.
Anything else?
I've been restricting myself to culinary factors. Let's see if there's anything else that... I'm going to struggle to get to 15. Kudos.
Oh, you would have to go to 24.
There's an inflection point, and then it starts shrinking. Fully assimilated, then you're like, everything is awesome.
What was your dream job growing up as a kid?
Well, Stefan, I was influenced, I guess, a lot by powerful role models around me. I was, very drawn to teaching when I had a great teacher, and I was once encountered a parent's friend who was a very capable engineer. So for a while, forget teaching, I'm going to do engineering. But then in the end, I guess I formed an opinion based on my own skill set and got kind of more attracted to business after buying and selling computers and making some okay money doing that in high school.
Okay. If you were to be sent out to a deserted island, what would be the 3 survival items that you would take with you?
So I would probably take, the other dream job, by the way, would be something that I actually pursued a little bit, comedy kind of professional. And so I've done some stand-up and won some screenwriting contests over the years. So I had fun pursuing that. So in that vein, I would definitely bring some of my collection of books, humor writing books, and not so much about the craft of writing them, but some really cool collections I have of just great humor over the centuries.
Okay. Anything else? You've got the 3 items. So you had 1 book.
So we've already kind of covered. I would imagine that the family, the wife and kids, are safely on the list. This is just the survival items. So I think music-wise, so survival items. Music isn't a survival item, nor is. I think you may have stumped me. I need to go back and become a Boy Scout or something, so I'd know what 3 things that I absolutely needed to, build shelter, maybe some seeds, something to build shelter, and something to start fires.
Okay. Let's go back to the stand-up thing. What did you make jokes about?
So a little bit like you and I were talking about earlier about the 15 things that maybe still bother you or irritate you about America 15 years into your experience.
Yeah.
I was focusing on the difference also, between life in the States and life in Ireland. But I was more making fun of myself. I could easily flip it and make fun of America, I guess. But I was, doing a routine that was based on this innocent abroad, adjusting to life in America and some of the, the strange things you have to get your head around. Illustratively, the first time an Irish person goes into a bank and sees tax-deductible contributions to the IRA, it kind of blows your mind.
That's a good one.
Thank you.
All right. What is the way for listeners to follow you and ValuesCulture on social media?
So I am on LinkedIn. I'm definitely welcome connecting with other culture vultures. So Peter Phelan, the culture doctor, will search results, will find me there. And then on Twitter, my handle is culturedoctorny.
All right. And we'll share those in the podcast notes as well. Any last word of wisdom or advice before we end up our conversation today?
So I would say on the culture front, if you're a business leader or if you're a people professional, definitely strive for truth. And if you can get even 70% or 80% of the way towards having a real fix on, what makes your organization special and what makes it tick, you will be ahead of the competition in terms of self-awareness. And with self-awareness comes, fewer broken promises. So, I'd say strive for truth.
That's a good way to end our conversation today. Thank you so much, Peter, for being on the show.
Thank you, Stefan. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to the EX Podcast. If you want to learn more, visit our website at expodcast.com. If you want to find out more about our next conferences, go to exsummit.com. Finally, you can also find my manifesto on business to employee or B2E branding at b2ebranding.co. See you next week.